Organizing my desk. I originally imagined this video to be an aesthetic, organize my desk with me video, but really it's a reflection on how a 70-year-old man taught me how my desk is the cornerstone of my practice. 10 years ago, I graduated from art school. That's right, I'm one of those with an art degree, which when it comes to regret, I like to think that I live on the optimistic side of things. While stressful and full of existential crises, I loved every second of it. It was weird and spontaneous, full of hard moments and wonderful people. At my particular school, incoming freshmen began in the Foundations program. Picking your major was reserved for sophomores. Freshmen lived on campus, in dorms together, had a separate studio building, and a separate set of instructors who in my mind were experts in just about anything. This enabled them to equip us with a broad set of representational skills that would ultimately help us select our chosen mediums. On the first day of school, I walked into a large warehouse known as the Foundations building and entered studio number 2 to find a serene elderly man with a wholesome smirk and a cane leaning against the table in which he sat. I joined a small group of students seated in front of the table, and this became our morning routine for the next 4 months together. My instructor, Carl, would regale us with stories of his wife Linda and lead us in small tutorials that often seemed so pointless and benign. From the outside, our class was known as the boring studio. You see, Carl wasn't one of the younger professors with a recent master's degree from the latest multidisciplinary program. He was a bookmaker and calligrapher. His work using text and line danced across the page to tell stories of faith and beauty. I was in his 40th studio he taught at my college. Our class earned the boring title because while other studios built cardboard cities and painted full-body portraits in color, we drew straight lines with charcoal. Those lines eventually became boxes and then cubes that we learned to make out of white paper. We later stacked those boxes to create still lives we drew for our midterm. While I thought Carl's tutorials were trivial, they are what I look back on most with not only nostalgia, but joy. Joy because thanks to Carl, I know how to perfectly fold paper, hold a straight edge, and cut pristine lines with an X-Acto knife. Carl taught not by his words, but by example. And he was sneaky about this. He set standards for us and our craft without ever having to explain what that meant. Let's back up a moment. When I say there was a separate space for the Foundation students and it was a warehouse, I meant it. The building was riddled with chairs and folding tables, weird lockers on wheels, concrete floors, and bleacher seating. It was totally DIY because this space allowed us to make mistakes and make messes, spill paint, and set things on fire. Instructors had to coax beautiful things out of us despite this chaotic place. Carl did so by how he organized his desk. During his tutorials, he sat at a plastic folding table with a layer of chipboard on top to create a smooth surface. Brown butcher paper trimmed perfectly to size covered the chipboard. A T-square, triangle, fresh cutting blades, and a pencil laid within easy reach. The chipboard created the tiniest raised edge to register the T-square against for consistent perpendicular lines. Without ever acknowledging it, myself and my classmates began to set up our own folding tables in this exact way. For the last 10 years, I'm thankful to have had more than a folding table to organize. But I take such pride in how I organize my studio. Before school, I had 2 white drafting tables, rolling organizers, and a writing desk. Now, I just have my 1.5 desks where I spend most of my days modeling in Rhino, drawing on tracing paper, and gluing foam core. Despite all that has changed in my life, I still return to the simple and methodical task of setting up the perfect workspace. At the start of every spring semester, there is a ritual of moving desks, moving from your fall studio to your new desk for the spring. No matter how disorganized it looks, models everywhere, the switch always happens. It's a cathartic time to document for portfolios and recycle the drawings you spent hundreds of hours on from last semester. Students use rolling chairs to move stacks of books, luggage for temporary storage, and I bring in my giant Aldi shopping bags. I have a classmate that stayed at the same desk for 2 semesters in a row. His space was practically a furnished apartment by the time he moved to a new spot. I, on the other hand, have moved every semester, and this is the last desk I'll have at Rudolph Hall before graduation this May. While I'll miss my spot from last semester with a giant window overlooking York Street, I'm thankful for this quiet corner on the 4th floor. As I organized my desk this semester, I often thought of Carl and what he would think now that I was in architecture school. I made some pretty sad platonic solids back in the day, but despite their desperate need for accuracy and glue, I didn't just make one, I made 10 until I got it right. I spent hours practicing my folds and straight lines, often staying until our studio's 1 a.m. closing time. When our studio graduated from straight lines and vine charcoal, Carl began to teach us the basics of bookmaking. The first assignment was to create a 20-page accordion fold book using a single ream of computer paper. The catch? There could only be a 32nd of an inch margin of error. Many of us laughed at the thought of having 500 pages to create a 20-page book that only needed 40 sheets of paper, until the majority of us folded all 500 pages looking for the most accurately cut edges. All of it was made possible by a prepared workspace that allowed for focus and clarity on the task at hand. My husband and I often debate the value of our art school education, wishing we had this class or that. The idea that maybe art school should prepare you for being a small business owner. Oliver also had one of the veteran studio professors, whose name was Steve. I think Steve put it best. We attend art school not just to improve our craft, but to find inspiration. We had 4 years while we were young to be completely immersed in our studio. We got to make things and be curious and fail a lot. I owe it to these ordinary moments of discipline or practice that shaped me into the artist, now architect, I hope to be.